My wife left me and goes on vacation with her lover, thinking she was still entitled to a portion of my trust fund. But what awaits her upon her return are lawsuits and time behind bars. Hello, I'm Aaron, a 28-year-old man. I'll try to tell the whole story here. Throughout my life, I've known that my friends were only around me because according to them, I was the trust fund kid. There were always people trying to get close to me because they thought I'd throw extravagant parties worldwide or cover the booze at events. They'd leave once they got nothing from me. It's true my parents set up a massive trust fund for me, but I know how hard they worked to achieve it. I know this wealth wasn't built overnight, and one mistake could completely ruin my father's company. So I work hard every day to expand what my father started. But recently, I came close to making that mistake, and that mistake is my wife, Ashley, also 28. In college, I didn't date anyone. I'm not the type to casually date or have fleeting relationships. I always wanted to date someone with marriage in mind, but when news about my parents' wealth spread, I attracted all kinds of bad company. You see, when you have money, you become popular and people want to live off you. I lent money to some friends and covered alcohol at a few parties, but nothing extravagant or close to what people expect from a trust fund kid. I believe doing things in moderation isn't bad. In fact, it's important because you also need to be part of society. So I tried to get along with everyone but rarely trusted anyone. At my graduation party, I met Ashley. She didn't seem to know who I was, and we started chatting casually. We hit it off immediately. We exchanged phone numbers, and on our first date, I took her to McDonald's, and we had the best time of our lives. She didn't seem to care that the first date wasn't fancy, and I fell in love. Ashley was the first love of my life. She wasn't boring and didn't seem to try hard to impress me. She was just herself. Plus, she was really smart. With her, I felt normal, and it seemed like she saw beyond my money. After a month of dating, I introduced her to my parents, and she didn't act surprised at all. She seemed to accept that I was wealthy with total neutrality. At the time, I thought it was a good sign that my wealth didn't faze her. It didn't occur to me that it was all part of her plan from the beginning. She absolutely knew who I was and knew I wasn't dating anyone, so winning me over was a carefully crafted plan. She was very poised when meeting my parents. She was charming, and I was completely in love. She was the first girl I'd brought home, and my parents were thrilled for me. We dated for a year, and during that time, she never accepted expensive gifts from me. Her reasoning was simply that we weren't married yet. After a year, I proposed. She was an absolute delight with my parents. She told them she only had one request, that they never ask her to stop working because she wanted to contribute to our wealth. My mom hugged her and said they were happy I'd found such a supportive wife. Ashley worked for a tech company and earned a decent income on her own. On our second anniversary, my parents hosted a party. They announced they wanted to give Ashley a gift, to include her name as a beneficiary along with mine. They introduced her to everyone, including Bob, the trustee. Bob was an accountant for the company who handled the legalities of the trusts and investments. He was married, and his wife was a lawyer at the same firm. Everything was done properly, and my wife's name was included as one of the beneficiaries. Ashley got along well with my parents and always went out of her way to keep them happy. She also worked and traveled a lot for her job. Later, I'd find out she was traveling with her lover. Whenever my parents hosted a party, she was eager to attend and looked stunning. Many times at these parties, I saw her chatting with Bob in a corner, laughing a little too much, blushing with a glass of wine in hand. Blinded by love, I never suspected she was having an affair with Bob. But all this time, the two of them were carrying on an affair behind my back. Looking back, I'm amazed by Ashley. She's a total actress. She treated each of us so well that even the thought of suspecting her seemed blasphemous. But she was just biding her time. Nearly 7 years into our marriage, my parents passed away within 6 months of each other. I threw myself into work because it was hard to deal with the emotions while also keeping the company afloat. That was the first time in years Ashley began to show her true colors. After the funeral, she was distant. I thought maybe she was grieving in her way and tried to give her space. She didn't say a word about my parents passing or ask how I was doing. It felt strange, but I secretly blamed myself for not being able to talk about how I felt. 2 weeks passed and I decided to come home early from work to talk to Ashley. I bought a bouquet of pink roses on the way home. I had my key, so I let myself in and came face to face with Bob. I was confused and asked if he'd come to talk to me about the trust or something. Ashley came out behind him with 2 suitcases. That's when I noticed Bob also had 2 suitcases. She looked at me and said, "Oh wow, I wanted to do this quietly. I planned to leave you a note saying I was moving out, but I guess we'll have to do this face to face. Yes, I'm leaving, you heard that right. And yes, I'm moving in with Bob after returning from our vacation in Italy. Your parents made sure I'd get enough money to afford it. Also, we're getting divorced. Bob is also filing for divorce now. Don't give me that abandoned puppy look. Are those flowers for me? I'll take them, thanks. Bye. They left before I could ask her to wait. I heard the car engine start and then silence. Just like that, out of nowhere, my wife of 7 years left me. Have you ever heard the expression, the world comes crashing down? That best describes how I felt. For 2 days, I didn't leave the house or open the blinds. I survived on leftovers and instant noodles. I never turned off the TV because I was scared of the silence. I didn't even feel like showering. On the 3rd day, someone rang the doorbell. I thought that if I didn't answer, they'd eventually leave, but they didn't. The ringing continued, and whoever it was started pressing the bell harder and for longer. 10 minutes went by, and the doorbell still hadn't stopped. Now someone was knocking on the door. I heard a woman's voice saying, "I know you're in there. Open up right now. I'm not leaving until I talk to you." For a moment, I thought it might be Ashley, but then I remembered she was in Italy on vacation with Bob. That thought brought another wave of sadness. But the knocking and ringing wouldn't stop, so I dragged myself out of bed and began opening the door. When I did, I was met with a red-haired woman dressed in a 2-piece suit. She looked like she was about to rip my head off. She said, "Your wife ran off with my husband. Sitting here as a wreck isn't going to help anyone, so get up, take a shower, and meet me in the living room in 15 minutes. We have a lot to talk about." When I didn't respond, she barged into the house, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You stink," before heading to the kitchen. I sarcastically said, "Okay, Mom," and she shouted back, "I heard that." Despite myself, I chuckled. After taking a shower, I started to feel a little human again. When I returned to the living room, it was spotless. The kitchen, too. Sandra, Bob's wife, introduced herself. She told me she'd been trying to reach me at my office for the last 2 days but couldn't, so she finally decided to show up at my door. She came with a mission, and I couldn't believe what she was telling me. Sandra said she, like me, hadn't suspected Bob was cheating on her and only found out when he left the house 2 days ago, saying he'd sent his assistant to pick up the rest of his things. Just like me, her world had fallen apart, but she didn't wallow in self-pity. She started investigating. The first thing she did was check Bob's computer. He stored work-related stuff there but had his Facebook account open. She wasted no time going through his messages and finding out who he was having an affair with. Once she was sure, she struck like a hawk. She had reviewed every document related to my trust fund and was quite certain Bob had been funneling money for his own use. It started with small amounts, so it went unnoticed, but eventually he grew bold and careless, aided by one of the beneficiaries, none other than Ashley. A part of me wanted to believe she was lying, but she wasn't. Sandra had all the evidence and was ready to confront them. I was still hesitant when Sandra said, "I have a young daughter. I'm going to squeeze every last cent out of Bob and I'm going to destroy Ashley completely. I don't care what you think. I just wanted to let you know, you don't have to be part of this if you don't want to." I saw how determined and confident Sandra was and instantly knew I could trust her, so I joined her. We shook hands. While my ex-wife was vacationing in Italy, we were plotting a plan that would cost her dearly. Ashley and Bob returned from their 10-day trip to Italy. Sandra and I were waiting for their call because we wanted to see how they'd react once they found out the truth. It was Monday, and I was at work when I got a call from Ashley. The moment I answered, she started ranting. "What the hell is going on? What does Bob mean by saying we're in trouble and where's my money?" I said, "You mean the money my parents worked for, which Bob used to buy you gifts and probably that apartment you moved into? I hope you've heard from my lawyer. It's Sandra, Bob's wife, who, by the way, also works at the firm." I told her I had to go and hung up before she could say another word. When I left work that day, Ashley was waiting outside. I pretended not to see her and walked to my car, but she stepped in my way. In all the years I knew her, I'd never seen her so upset about anything. She begged me to explain things because apparently, whatever Bob was telling her didn't make sense, and she wanted to hear it from me in simple terms. I told her I'd heard about her divorce filing, except she wasn't getting a single cent. Wow, the look on her face. Never in her wildest dreams did she think this could happen. I could see the panic building inside her. I felt a mix of sadistic satisfaction and overwhelming guilt for putting her in this situation. I still loved her, and it's hard to see the person you love suffer. I had to get out of there quickly before she could manipulate me. I walked past her and kept heading to my car. I heard her shouting behind me, asking me to stop. The last thing I heard before getting into the car was, "How could you do this to me?" It felt like a stab, and I wanted to shout back just as loudly and ask her the same damn question. But instead, I got into the car and left. I saw her standing there, completely bewildered in the rearview mirror. Meanwhile, Bob had been served a notice of termination from the company. He was ruining the company's reputation, and apparently, word had gotten out, leading many clients to call and request to terminate their contracts. The best thing the company could do to control the damage was to fire Bob. Sandra, who had many lawyer friends, got the best one she could find and was confident she'd win the case and get custody. Sandra kept updating me on everything while I drove home, and I felt much lighter. When I got home, I wrote this. My interaction with Ashley left me feeling deeply unsettled, and I needed to vent. Do you think I'm being too harsh on Ashley? Am I the bad guy here? Update 1. Hi everyone, I'm back with another update. It's been a week, and I just want to thank everyone for their support and for helping me when I felt so confused. I had my first therapy session and showed my therapist this Reddit post. They said it's a good way to cope and that it's natural to grieve the person I lost, in this case, Ashley. So it's normal that I felt so overwhelmed after dropping the bombshell. As for what happened this week, I'll try to summarize it for all of you. Ashley called me again, and this time her tone was softened. Her voice sounded muffled, as if she'd been crying. She asked if I'd had dinner, and when I said no, she asked, "Do you want me to come over and cook you something?" I was stunned. I think she took my silence as a yes because she then said she'd be at my house in half an hour. I finally found my voice and said, "No, you won't. Are you joking? After what you've done, you want to come here, cook me dinner, and pretend everything's fine?" She said, "Honey, no, I know things have been bad, but we can talk." That's when I lost control. I think I shouted at that moment and said, "Bad? You call what you did bad? Just bad?" It was wicked, brutal, and selfish. To hell with you. I don't want to see your face again. What the hell is wrong with you? What she said next made me want to vomit. She asked me to stop exaggerating. I think that was a turning point for me. The guilt of hurting her had been eating me up inside, but at that moment I saw her true face. A woman who had no remorse for her actions and would do it all over again without a second thought. The call was an attempt to manipulate me, a trap. She didn't realize that I'd already figured her out and continued saying that I was painting her as a gold digger in the lawsuit, but that wasn't true because she had a job and earned her own money. I wanted to point out how I'd paid off all her student loans, so if she was living comfortably now, it was thanks to me and my family. She told me the only reason she wanted to come was that she thought we needed to talk to get back together, and that I should drop the lawsuit because it was pointless. I couldn't help but ask her, "And what about Bob?" She said Bob was someone different and that she'd had an affair with him because he brought a change to her monotonous life. Then she started blaming me for being away at work and for never being there for her. She said her affair with Bob was passionate and I lacked that. Instead of apologizing to her, I was filing a lawsuit. At that moment, I was convinced she was just trying to make me lose my patience. I told her that if she'd been having so many problems, she could have talked to me about them, or we could have gone to couples therapy. Cheating was never the solution. She deflected and started insisting on coming over. I hung up the call and called Sandra. I told her what had happened. Sandra asked me to call Ashley back and tell her to come over. She said she'd come too. She asked me to play along and see what Ashley's real motive was. So I ended my call with Sandra and called Ashley. She sounded so smug when she answered. She said she knew I'd change my mind and would be at my house in half an hour. Before Ashley arrived, Sandra showed up. I didn't know what her plan was, and there wasn't enough time for her to explain. She came in and asked me to make sure Ashley sat at the dining table. Sandra said she'd make a special appearance in this drama. Ashley arrived about 40 minutes later, and it was obvious she'd made an effort to look good, and the truth is, she did. She came in, kissed me, and was heading toward the bedroom where Sandra was. So I stopped her and asked her to sit at the dining table. She turned to me, pouted, and said, "But why, love? Did I lose my rights so easily? Was your love so weak? Won't you fight for us, darling?" At that moment, Sandra came out of the bedroom. Ashley seemed too shocked to speak and said something like, "What the hell?" Sandra smiled at Ashley and said, "We finally meet, the woman who's dating my useless husband, Bob the cheater. And yes, did you lose your right to the bedroom? Sure seems like it." Ashley turned to me and said, "How could you replace me so easily? Are you sleeping with Bob's wife after taking all my happiness away? We had so many debts, and now we won't even get the damn trust fund money. And God knows who leaked the news. But now Bob is unemployed, and I might get fired too. You're so selfish." Sandra interjected and said, "What do you mean by we had debts? Is it like a joint loan? Were you helping Bob embezzle and withdraw the funds or what?" Then Ashley shouted, "Of course I did. I supported Bob from day one. Do you think he could have planned something like this on his own? Obviously I helped. Unlike you, you evil witch. You've been nothing but condescending to him, which is why he chose me over you. Get lost. How can you be here when your husband is unemployed? Why the hell don't you make a statement in his favor and help him?" Sandra smiled sweetly and then told me she thought I should send Ashley home now. The job was done. I understood the signal and opened the door for Ashley to leave. She left, throwing a string of insults at us. When she left, I turned to Sandra and asked, "What just happened?" Sandra stopped a recorder and then winked at me, her eyes shining. She said excitedly, "We have a confession, Aaron. We're going to ruin them. I told you I'm not letting either of them get away." That, my friends, is Sandra for you. She's smart and ruthless. If I were Ashley or Bob, I'd be terrified of her. She's just too good at what she does." Before she left, Sandra confessed that she'd obviously been the one to leak the news about Bob. I told her her intelligence was rubbing off on me, and I'd already deduced she had something to do with it. Guys, I'll keep you posted. The game has finally begun. Update 2. Well, I'm back with another update, maybe too soon, but I couldn't wait to tell you. Sandra is absolutely relentless. She sent the recording to Ashley's company with a detailed explanation of what was happening. The note said something like, "Someone who can go to such extremes to deceive the people who care about her isn't a credible person to work at this company. She'd probably embezzle funds if given the opportunity." Sandra also knew one of the business partners at Ashley's firm, who happened to be an old friend of hers. Sandra's friend abruptly pulled out of a deal they were about to sponsor, saying there were certain team members whose credibility he doubted, so the deal was off the table. Ashley's boss was completely blindsided when this news hit. They made a swift decision to save the deal. They fired the person responsible. That's it. Just like that, out of nowhere, my ex-wife was fired from the company. Now both Ashley and Bob are unemployed and drowning in debt. Sandra told me Bob had been calling her non-stop, and when she didn't answer, he started sending her messages. She told him to stop bothering her and blocked him. Honestly, I'm enjoying this. I've also been attending my therapy sessions, and my therapist told me Ashley might be a textbook case of narcissism. I found that a bit amusing and laughed freely for the first time in a long time. Anyway, I'll keep you all posted. Oh, and did I mention Bob was arrested? Apparently, Ashley had to use her savings account to bail him out. Well deserved. Bye for now. Update 3. This morning, Sandra called me, furious. Apparently, Bob had been ringing her doorbell non-stop since early in the morning. He was drunk and wouldn't stop insulting her. Her security camera recorded the entire incident. When Sandra asked him to leave, he tried to force his way in. He only left when Sandra threatened to call the police. The worst part of the entire incident was that, due to all the noise, Emily, Sandra, and Bob's daughter woke up. She saw what was happening, and now she's traumatized. Divorce is usually hard on children, but seeing your father drunk at your door, insulting your mother, and trying to break in is on another level. Since then, Emily has refused to come out of her room. Sandra asked me to come to her house since she had to go to the police station to file a restraining order. She couldn't find a babysitter on such short notice, and I told her I'd go. I called work, asking them to notify me if they needed anything. As soon as I got to Sandra's house, she was at the door. She told me that if Emily came out, I should give her something to eat because she hadn't even had breakfast. As soon as Sandra left, I knocked on Emily's door. Since no one answered, I went in anyway. I don't know why, but I felt paranoid about the silence. I was thinking of the worst scenarios and couldn't sit still while the child was suffering. When I entered the room, there was no one there, and I started to hyperventilate. But then a small movement caught my attention. Emily was hiding under the bed. A small girl of 3 or 4 years old who looked a lot like her mom, except for her hair. She looked at me with eyes full of terror. She stammered in fear and somehow managed to ask me if I was her dad's friend and if Bob had sent me. I knelt down and introduced myself, telling her that I was actually her mom's friend, not her dad's. She seemed to relax a bit at that, but then anxiously looked out the window and asked if her dad was gone. I assured her that he was and told her that her mom was like a tigress who would protect her cub with everything she had. That's when she started crying, telling me she was afraid Bob would break in and hurt her mom. I told her I would never let that happen. My heart broke for this innocent girl who not only had lost her father, but had also realized how horrible he was. I convinced her to come out and put on her favorite Disney movie. I heated up some lasagna and gave it to her to eat. Sandra told me that when she returned, she found Emily sleeping on my chest while I drooled on her favorite pillow. That night, when I was about to leave, Emily clung to my legs and wouldn't let me go. She cried a lot, and in the end, she told me she was scared Bob would come back and there wouldn't be anyone to protect her mom. I made a joke saying her mom didn't need protection, but I shut up when Sandra rolled her eyes. It would have been hard to explain the restraining order to a child, so I decided to stay that night. Emily slept peacefully, and so did I. The next morning, Sandra made us amazing pancakes before I left for work. Emily made me promise to come back to sleep at their house that night. So, well, I guess that's my life now. I have to spend my nights at Sandra's house. Sandra has been trying to find a good child psychologist, but so far, she hasn't had any luck. I'll keep you updated after the first hearing. Update 4. It's been quite some time since my last update, hasn't it? Well, the first hearing has already happened. This is what I've been able to gather as someone without legal knowledge. Ashley and Bob are completely finished. That's not a legal term, but it's what I could deduce from all the legal jargon. Yes, I mean it. They're more cooked than a barbecue. We have such damning evidence against them. But you know how courts are, so this will take some time. Sandra thinks it won't take more than half a year and is confident both of them will serve prison time. Regarding the divorce, it's clear Ashley and Bob won't receive a single penny. Additionally, Bob will have to pay child support for his daughter. Both have been looking for jobs, but without any luck. The latest news is that Bob is working as a janitor at a nearby club. Outside the court, we saw Bob being beaten by some loan sharks. Things look bad for that man. When he saw Sandra outside the court, he ran toward her and fell to his knees, begging her to take him back. But at this point, he should know that's not going to happen. Sandra's lawyer told us the case is so strong in her favor that Bob probably won't even get visitation rights. Update 5. Here I am again with another update. Despite what Sandra had predicted about how long the process would take, she ended up being slightly wrong. She said everything would take half a year, but it turned out to be a bit longer, almost 7 months. Or, well, 6 months and a week to be precise, so technically, I have to admit she wasn't far off. The truth is, compared to what one would expect from the courts, it was surprisingly quick. Still, the outcome was everything we hoped for and more. Ashley and Bob received exemplary sentences. Not that I take pleasure in seeing anyone behind bars, but when you've been betrayed, manipulated, and forced to endure so much garbage from people you trusted, well, seeing them finally get what they deserve has its own flavor of justice. It's like a good cup of coffee after a sleepless night. Bitter, yes, but it energizes you. Ashley, that girl who seemed to have everything under control, who lived in a bubble of luxury, who thought her smile could get her out of anything, now faces something very different. No more trips to Europe, no more romantic dinners at expensive restaurants, no more designer handbags she used to flaunt with pride. Now she has to deal with the harsh reality of prison, a world entirely opposite to what she was used to. The only kind of lovers she'll find there are nothing like Bob, and while it may seem cruel, I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up finding a way to enjoy the change in her life. After all, who am I to say how she'll adapt? Bob, on the other hand, isn't doing any better. In fact, his situation is probably worse. He still owes a lot of money to those loan sharks, and we all know we're not talking about banks or legal financial entities. We're talking about people who won't hesitate to use any means to collect what they're owed. And the worst part for Bob is that he borrowed money from the kind of people who have connections even inside the prison. If I were him, I'd be scared, very scared. But thankfully, I'm not him. I'm in a very different position, a mere spectator watching all this unfold from a distance, popcorn in hand. And in case you're wondering, no, Bob didn't get custody of his daughter. I think that was already a given, but it's worth clarifying. After everything he's done, the court wasn't going to allow someone like him to have even the possibility of being near his daughter, at least not without supervision. Emily, Sandra, and Bob's daughter, has been strong in her own way. It's incredible how resilient children can be, although it's still heartbreaking to see how someone so young has had to face so much confusion and chaos at such an early age. Sandra, of course, has been an amazing mother. There's no doubt she's doing everything she can to ensure Emily doesn't feel the weight of what's happening between her parents. I've tried to help as much as I can, though, to be honest, there are days when I wonder if I'm really making a difference. But Emily seems to trust me, and that's more than I expected. As for the trial, it was quite a spectacle. The judge didn't take long to see the full picture, and although both of their lawyers tried to discredit the evidence, it was futile. The verdict was clear. They were both convicted. And although they could appeal, as often happens in these cases, it won't make much of a difference. Sandra is convinced they'll both spend a long time in prison, and I believe that too. Speaking of Sandra, many of you have suggested that we get tested for sexually transmitted diseases. Well, as expected, we already have. Sandra, being as astute as she is, suggested we couldn't be too careful, so we both got the necessary checkups. Thankfully, everything came back clear. I suppose, after everything we've been through, a little relief doesn't hurt. For those wondering if Sandra and I are together, the answer is no. And before you ask, no, it's not because there's no connection between us. I think after everything we've been through together, it's obvious there's some sort of bond. But it would be unwise to jump from one toxic relationship into another, or even to start something new while we're both still dealing with the fallout of what our ex-partners did. You could say we're good friends. Sandra is someone I trust deeply, but dating someone who constantly reminds you of what you've been through isn't on our priority list right now. So here I am, updating everything that's happened so far. Ashley and Bob are in a situation with no way out. Even if they somehow manage to get out of prison earlier than expected, they'll remain people marked by debt, betrayal, and public humiliation. Sandra and I are moving on with our lives. She's focused on being an amazing mom to Emily, while I'm trying to get my life back on track after all this chaos. For now, that's all I have to share.